Hi, this is Rachel with Fiona Sandwich Patterns, and in this video we will be making an enlarged block. So the first thing that you will need to do is print out your pattern at 100%. You cannot enlarge most likely on your computer unless you have some software and then you can move things around. What I found the easiest thing to do was print my pattern at 100% and then either cut or fold around all of the corners. Let's just go ahead and rip this off here. Because all you need is just the pattern. If you are selecting a pattern that is larger and goes from edge to edge, you'll have to do this in stages, and then you'll need to tape together and you'll just kind of need to do some moving around a little bit. So for this, what I have decided to do is double the size of the small national park block, and I want to double it so that it still fits in with the rest of my national park blocks. So if you have a 4.5 inch block and you put 4 together, that's doubling it, and that's creating a 9 inch finished block, which is 9.5 inches unfinished. So you need to take the finished size of whatever block you're working on, and then you need to think about what the finished size of the enlarged block that you want is. So the next thing that you need to do is you need to take the size that you want over the current size. And then you are going to multiply that by 100. So and this has to be the finished size, so take finished to finished. This might take a little bit of extra mental gymnastics, but if you go through this now, you will save yourself a lot of stress and heartache later. So this has to be finished. Okay, so what I have is I have 4.5, and the size that I want finished is 9. So 4.5 9 divided by 4.5 times 100, math is not my strong suit, gives us the final of 200%. So I know that I need to enlarge this pattern on my printer 200%. So to reiterate, what I did was I printed out my original pattern at 100%, because if I print it out at 200%, I'm only going to get a portion of it, and I don't have an option to move things around. Let me show you how I printed out for a different pattern. So this is what it should have printed out like, and you can see that I only got a little bit of it. It was actually, this is the one. I was only able to get just little sections of it, and it was really, really, really frustrating. So what I ended up doing, I discovered that it was much easier to print 100%, and then I could enlarge on my printer when I was completed printing out. So these have been enlarged to 200%, and I would not worry about these really large seam allowances because we're going to cut those down. So again, to reiterate, because this is the part that is the most confusing, you need your finished size, the finished size that you want, and the current size of the pattern, what it prints out as. And my patterns are divisible by 4.5. So you'll divide this, and then you'll multiply by 100 to get 200%. Okay, so then what I had to do is you'll need to test this with your printer, because every printer has things arranged in different places. So I found the corner that my printer expanded from, and I had to print one way this way and then one way this way. So it was, you know, obviously upside down. So if you were looking at it one way this way and one way this way. So I ended up getting 2 pieces of paper, and this is the first way that it printed, and you can see that I had a little bit cut off. So by turning the original 100% pattern around, I got this and then this. So I just need the A section, and then I need the B section and the C section. So I'm not going to be concerned about this, but if you have a larger block, maybe one that's taller, you know, 4.5 by 9, and you want to make it 9 by, I don't know, would that be 13, 16? No, that would not be correct. Don't use my math. Because I don't do math in my head. So anyway, then if you're doing that, you would need to tape these together. I would use a light box so you can see exactly where you need to tape these together. So what I'm going to do is I'm still going to give myself lots of extra room right here, and I'm going to make this piece disappear because all I want on my table is just what I'm going to be working on, because you do not want to confuse yourself. All right, do keep your instructions nearby, but this one's a pretty easy one. And then sometimes layout is really helpful as well, so we'll just set those aside. Now, I'm not going to show how my method of construction for the pieces, because that's all the same. You will still, I would absolutely use the glue method for the first piece, and then all you'll do is you'll still fold over, and then you're still going to have your pieces cut out 1/4 of an inch. For the sake of education and the video, I have thought that it is a little bit better to sacrifice some extra fabric just so that we can talk about how the block fits together, and then resizing. One word of caution, everybody should know how much I love glue sticks. I think for these larger pieces I absolutely would use glue, because you can see that I have a lot of extra fabric here. So what I am going to do is I'm going to remove this seam, and I am going to resew it, because that is going to become a little bit problematic when I sew pieces together. So if you haven't seen my method, it's really quite simple. This is the biggest reason why I do not recommend scoring all of your lines in advance, because this is now weakened. But if you put a little bit of glue down in this area, then the template becomes stabilized, and then you can move it a little bit more. And I was just off by, you know, maybe about 1/16 of an inch, and I probably don't need to do this. very, very little will come off. Yeah, just a little hair, but all that ends up adding up and it really becomes a bear. Now the great part is that you can just line this back up with where it was and then you can re-sew. So I'm just lining up the raw edge that I had trimmed. So everybody should know my affinity for glue sticks, but especially for these larger places, it is really, really helpful to have just a little bit of glue. It becomes a third hand almost. Now the other word of caution is these sew lines become much larger, and with a smaller block, the print line is about the width that a needle would be going in, but these are almost double the size. So you kind of need to decide, are you going to be sewing along the side or are you going to be sewing along the middle? I would recommend sewing in the middle as much as you can. And I don't know how well the pieces are going to meet up. So that's going to be a little bit of a learning curve for both of us. So the next thing that you will want to do is measure your block. Now remember, we're working with the finished size. So you probably should double check this beforehand. But what I'm doing is I'm measuring the sew line to the sew line, and I see that it's 9 inches. So that will be great. I don't need to have this large of a seam allowance, because if I did, it would make the block 10 inches unfinished, and then with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, that would make it 9.5 inches unfinished. So then everything would be the wrong size. So measure from where your sew line is to your sew line. And as I always do, we are going to line up the sew line, the outside sew line, and have the 1/4 inch marking. I'm going to actually use the larger one because this is so long. Let's see, and I have grips on here, so I want to make sure that I'm going to be gripping, and I am going to make sure that my sew line is in the center of the 1/4 inch dotted line. And take your time with this. I think this is probably one place where I would have your block be a little bit larger than you normally would. If you normally trim all of your blocks, all of your template pieces down to size exactly, before you put them together, I think I would probably leave a little bit extra around the outside pieces. Just in case you need a little bit of kind of some wiggle room, if you will. Oh, that one moved a little bit. Darn. It becomes a little bit of a problem with larger blocks, and that's really why I like these grippies, but I think the grips are not quite in the right place to be gripping where I need it to be gripping. Okay, so we're going to sew B and C together first. Even though it says sew A and B together first. I'm going to do B and C because A is just a large piece right here, so that can kind of wiggle things around a little bit. But because I need a little bit more to be lined up in this block, I'm going to start with the B and C first. So what I really want to do is I want to focus on making sure that the outside of the block is going to be as straight as possible. Recommend for a block that is more complex, that has pieces that really need to join together exactly in a particular spot, that you probably do some practicing to get comfortable with where all of the lines need to meet up and where the best place is to sew all of your pieces. Are you going to sew it on the side? Are you going to sew it in the middle? And just use some fabric that you don't care so much about, so that you can get this part down and you can get comfortable with it. Okay. And that's off a little bit, but I think I'm pretty comfortable with it. The outside of my block matches pretty well, and I think it's, you know, it's a mountain. So they don't have to be totally exact, but that's kind of what I'm talking about, that you really do want to take your time and learn where the pieces are going to line up, and then even maybe giving yourself the extra space that we had on the outside, so that you can line up the inside of your pieces. Just like I talked about in all of the other videos, you want to make sure that the inside of the block matches up. And it doesn't really matter about the outside of the block. Okay, this is what we have so far. And you can see that here, it probably should have been shifted over a little bit more. So then again, what you could do is leave these parts here. I mean, you could even just sew and have a 1/2 inch seam allowance and then trim it down. That's one option. Where's my big ruler? Here we go. There are really lots of options for you when you enlarge the block. So, you know, just decide what you want to do and then have that same method for the whole block, and then decide if you like it or not. And I think for the sake of this one, I am going to leave these a little bit larger, and then I can trim it down. That becomes a little bit easier. Oops. And this is what I want to do. So then what I have over here is I have lots of extra wiggle room that I can just cut this down. And then you can make sure that you have a really nice and square block. That makes it a little bit easier. And another word of caution, which may seem obvious to some and maybe less obvious to others. I always write down how I've enlarged it. So if you want to enlarge these blocks to 6 inches finished, for example, then you'll need to enlarge all of the other blocks by the same amount so that they all fit together, or you may just need to add a border or something like that so they all fit together. Another thing for these really long straight pieces, I do find that it's much easier to use quilting gloves when I'm sewing because the paper just kind of likes to move all over and it gets really slippery. And this is generally the point where I remove all of my papers and give a final press, but because the bottom piece is not the same size, I'm going to leave the papers in, I'm going to trim it, and then I'll remove all of the paper, and then I will starch it once all of the paper is all out. So I have some squares marked on, well, a rectangle and a square marked on my cutting mat so that I know what sizes different blocks are. So this one I know is the right size this way. This is 9.5 unfinished. So I'm going to put this in here, line up my block with the registration marks. Sometimes a little bit of tape is also really helpful to keep your piece down. And you can see that I haven't been paying attention to this area here for the 1/4 inch because I have my lines marked on the side. So then I'm going to do the opposite. I hope that made sense. I didn't explain that very clearly. So I'm lining up the bottom of the block. And then I'm going to cut right here. Okay, so there we have it. That's the finished Great Sand Dunes block. I think it looks great. I think it's all going to come together really well. Then the next thing that you would need to decide if you're enlarging all of these blocks is how you're going to handle the National Park sign block. So maybe you just want to use this to add a little bit of emphasis. Maybe you want to enlarge your National Park sign block. Maybe you don't even want to do park sign blocks. Maybe you want to just put a patch on your block. It's yours, so you decide what you want to do. But I hope this video has been really helpful for you. I hope it helps kind of clear some things up. I think to just maybe touch on something again, I would line up the center of the block. I would leave the seam allowances really large until you get the center lined up where you want, and then I would trim to 1/4 inch, and then I would trim the outside. Every time I do this, I learn something different, so you are learning right alongside of me. So I hope you love this video. Please share it with your friends. I know this is something that a lot of quilters really want to know, is how do I enlarge a block to a size that I want. So I hope this has been helpful for you, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks for joining. Bye-bye.